I am so interested also in the aspects of, your work that you talk about in the book and the sort of incredibly complicated feelings that you had while you were on Chuck, which again, as you say, from the outside, it seemed like, wow, you were on this show that so many people liked. And yet it was kind of always on the bubble. Were they going to renew it or not? There were, shrinking budgets, product placements, all of these things that, are normal things to sometimes go through on a TV show. But anytime there was a problem at work, it sort of reinforced the problems that you had with yourself. And I think a lot of people relate to that as well.
Yeah. I would imagine most actors are not exactly the most stable in their mental or emotional well-being, which is part of the reason why we are running after the validation of complete strangers. So definitely walked into my whole career with a lot of that, kind of undercurrent. And this constant feeling of needing to get the approval of my parents, first my actual parents, but then these work parents, these people that were my bosses that I wanted to please so much. And I wanted them to be proud of me and happy with me and what I was bringing to the table. And while, I could feel that sometimes, I suppose, when you put your heart and soul, as I did, into that show, and not just, working 16-hour days, day upon day, sometimes, 14-hour days. I mean, it was my whole life. It was my entire life. And I was happy to give it. I was so grateful that I had this amazing opportunity to be the star of my own TV show. And it's what I dreamed of being able to do. But because of the situation, as you were kind of mentioning, of being on the bubble every year, our ratings were okay. I mean, now if we were on now and had the ratings we had then, we'd be
biggest
smash hit. We'd be a smash hit.
Biggest show ever.
Yeah. But at the time, NBC was, they were trying to figure out how do we put together our lineup, and we did okay, but they were always kind of hoping we might do better. And so every year they'd develop more shows thinking that, well, we'll probably find a replacement. And then yet every year, as it turned out, they would look at all those shows and be like, oh, none of them are really testing the way we want to. Well, let's bring Chuck back, but let's not give them the same budget. And that trickles down to Warner Brothers. And then that trickles down to all of us. And so, when you're busting your hump and you're not only just, shooting the show as much as you're shooting it, but also, I mean, bro, they said, jump. And I said, how high? I would go and do every bit of press, everywhere, everything I could do, because I felt a responsibility to the rest of my cast and the rest of my crew. If I'm going to be number one on that call sheet and I'm going to be the lead, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything to keep us going. And I always hoped that all of that would play into, in some way, like, hey, you know what? You deserve a raise, or whatever it is. But all of those things just never came to fruition. I just kind of felt like I was working my tail off, and none of that really meant anything to anybody, on the higher levels. And that just kind of makes you feel even more worthless. You're like, oh, wow, I'm just a puppet, really. I'm just this meat puppet that does, hits my marks and finds my light and says my lines. And you're real happy with that. But when it comes to showing that on a more personal level or whatever, it's just not there. And because I had all this unhealed trauma, all of that was just triggering and flaring up, and like, oh my, lots of even more depression and anxiety and things like that on top of everything else that we were dealing with. But look, at the end of the day, I take all of it as lessons. I take all of it as learning and growing. And I'm so grateful for that time in my life. And I'm still hoping I get to make a Chuck movie one day, because I think it would be so much fun.
Well, we're all waiting on that.
Yeah.
Zach. Yeah. I mean, seriously, it would be amazing.